Hi there. I've got the lovely David Lean with me today, and I'm just going to read to you a little bit of info about David as an introduction. So David is a survivor of sexual abuse within football. As a 12-year-old boy, David was abused by British sport's most prolific paedophile, Barry Bennell. In fact, David Lean's case involved having to change the prosecution guidance in England after his case was initially dropped by the CPS because it was not seen as in the public interest to prosecute. After a 2.25-year fight, he was eventually convicted in May 2015, which highlighted this individual and as such started the domino effect which saw many other men come forward and the abuse within football scandal began. So thank you very much, David, for agreeing to chat. We've sort of met over Twitter and I've really followed your story, and I just feel like you've held your own with such conviction and courage that I've gained a great deal of respect for you from everything that I've seen that you've done. I've seen you do interviews and your tweets, and I've read your story. So just to put it into context for anybody who might not know your story, could you give us some background, please?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, it is obviously a long story. It's a complicated story at times. I think the bit that I want to get over, first of all, is in relation to him himself, Barry Bennell, is people having an understanding of a sex offender, child sex offender, paedophile. And that's that they are often in positions of trust, and they are in positions where they can get access to children. And they're not all old men, sort of, down back alleys, hiding away. These are very much at the forefront of our communities. And this is, the people talk about those words, historic or non-recent. This is going on today. Don't let anybody be under any illusions. And with online abuse, it's growing, and it's something that people need to be aware of. So for someone to give me the platform to speak, first of all, is important, and hopefully we'll reach a new audience. And if we reach a few people that have not heard the story before, that to me is really important. So thank you. Yeah, I was 11, went on a family holiday. We're talking 1979 now. I'm giving away my age, but we're talking 1979. And anybody who knew Butlins in 1979 will know that this was a hive of activity. I mean, this was almost like the place to go. It was really busy. It was seasonal in those days, and it was sort of only operated really from May to September, the first week in September. And I went family holiday. Two of my brothers came with me, and in those days, running, I was already playing football to a good level. I was doing really well with my football. All I wanted to be was a footballer. I was obsessed with football, and I think, people talk about, the grooming process. I think from his side of things, everything he had was in place to groom a child. And it doesn't take much when you're obsessed with football if your football coach is naturally brilliant at football. And that's all you need to be, a charismatic character, very friendly. At the time, only 24 years of age himself, very muscular and athletic guy, heterosexual, really important that people understand that this guy's got a girlfriend, eventually married, and he had 2 children of his own. This is not some weird guy that people have this perception of. Absolutely loved by everybody, kids. People have mentioned about the Pied Piper, and I think that's a pretty good example, really, of what he was like. And you're at a Butlins holiday camp, you feel safe within that camp, and he just took a shine to me. I obviously was enthralled and absolutely mesmerised by him. He could do things with a football that are commonplace now. You see a lot of people being able to juggle these balls and do skills with the ball. It's commonplace. But in 1979, it wasn't. And my football coach at the time, was sort of a middle-aged bloke. had played a bit himself, but just, he was just that type of guy. And all of a sudden, you're being coached by this 24-year-old. And he's an ex-youth player at Chelsea, and just brilliant. And my dad used to stand every session, and my dad's dream was for me to become a footballer. Not a pushy dad at all, don't get me wrong, but wanted what his son wanted. So came to watch me play, loved watching me play, and got to know him really well over that week. And the end of the week came, I didn't win what they call Boy of the Week, sorry. I didn't actually win the Boy of the Week. I was really upset with that, but I got what I classed as something better. And that was that he told me I was a little star, that he wanted to keep writing to me, that he wanted me to go and trial to play for his team next season, because this was sort of the May. And I couldn't get this out of my head. I started writing to him as soon as I got back. I was writing to him at Butlins, and he was writing back to me. And I persuaded my mum and dad to go back. We'd never had 2 holidays in a year before, ever. So to get to go back was unbelievable. And I'd been practicing these skills he'd taught me. And when I went back, he was even more, showed me more attention. I don't even know whether that was possible, but he used me for all the drills, all the demos. He gave me some football shirts. It was like I only got presents at Christmas. It was Christmas and birthday. So to get a shirt from your idol, if you will, your hero, in between birthdays and Christmases was just incredible. And he picked me as Boy of the Week. I had my very first picture, the picture which a lot of people will have seen on Sky News or some of the interviews, is of me and him at Butlins. And we continued to write. I was already playing for a team I was living in Lytham St Anne's, just near Blackpool at the time. That's where I spent the first 24 years of my life were in Lytham St Anne's. And he kept writing, and eventually I got the opportunity to go to his house, where he was, which was in Taxall Edge Children's Home. He was working there, just outside Macclesfield, and I got the opportunity to go there for what he said was going to be a soccer school, and go over and spend a few nights with him. And to be honest, my dad never gave it a second thought. I never gave it a second thought. Why would you? This is a wonderful football coach, dedicated, who thinks I'm a star, and gave me the opportunity to go over there. And on the 2 nights that I stayed there, the minute the door closed, he never left me alone. I've got a brother who's 7 years older than me, and he used to play fight with me, tickle me, sort of, whip me with a tea towel, beat me up a bit, and just mess around with me in general, and a lot of it was like that at first, but it was close contact. It was touch in some way. It was having some sort of, he'd rub his bristle from his face on my cheeks. Anything he could do to get close to me, and then eventually over the 2 evenings, sexually abused me for a long period of time on both the evenings that I stayed. Completely lost is how I describe it really after that. At that stage, completely sexually naive. I was only 12. I think a 12-year-old in 1980, as it was at the time, was probably somewhere the equivalent of about an 8-year-old now. There's the internet now, there's a lot more education in schools and etc. There was nothing then. I was completely unaware of what happened. But it was really strange, and I think it's important to say it. And it's took me a while to say these words because, but it's important that people understand, and that's where I speak out now. Really, it's not to glorify it, but it's not to hide from it either. What happened to me affected me for a long, long time, and during the abuse, I became erect, and that to me was wrong. Then the years after, you question your own sexuality, and it was in some ways some some of what happened was pleasurable. Again, really confusing, really hard and difficult to understand. And that is, one of the problems that people have to live with after. And when you can't and don't feel you can speak out and reach out and have people to support you, you cope with it in whatever way you can. And I was, I say it with a sort of glint, but in a way, one of the lucky ones in the fact that a lot of the boys that were abused by Bennell and by people around the world are abused on a regular basis. They're abused within their family home. It's happening on a week-to-week basis, a day-to-day basis. The fear I had on that second night, when I knew what was coming, was far worse for me psychologically than the first evening, when I had no idea what was going to happen. How people deal with that when you know it's coming is incredible. And the people that have to go and experience that, it's terrifying for me to think about. But at the same time, how they cope with this in their lives is incredible. But make no mistake on the impact that will have on that individual. So yeah, I felt safe at home, and I was one of the lucky ones in the fact that my abuse wasn't within the house. It wasn't happening by a loved family member, and I think that's what kept me sane, if I'm honest. I think that's kept me grounded, and I always had that love surrounding me. But I came home, I don't know exactly, maybe a month, 6 weeks after what had happened to me. And I'd already decided I was never going to write to him again. I was never going to have any contact. And I came home and he was sat in my house. He was sat talking to my mum in what we classed as the best room of the house. The room people only ever went in when guests came. In 1980, that's one of the things that I don't think it happens as much now, but it certainly did then. And I knew there was somebody here. I thought it was a grandma or somebody. Went bounding into the room. My mum sort of waving me in, and I walked in and froze. And it's really weird when you tell the story, because I just then I had if you will, a little flashback, and I can see him now, talking here, and I can see him, and he was sat there with a woman, and the woman was of similar age, and that confused me as well. I had no idea. I just presumed that he must be gay, and there he is with a woman. And that experience was terrifying for me. Now it was in my house. He knew where I lived. He had my address, but you can have somebody's address but not really have a clue where they are or where that house is. So that affected me for months after. For months, just one visit. I didn't want to come home from school. I was terrified of walking in. I was always unsure. And it took months to get over that. And the impact of just something like that. And yeah, I was sat next to my mum. I would never have gone and sat next to my mum. I was almost shaking on the floor. I certainly wasn't a mummy's boy. I was very much a dad's lad. My dad took me to football. And I think in those days, my mum, there was 4 of us. I've got 3 brothers. All she did, and I say all, is she did the cooking, the cleaning, the ironing, got us up in the morning, made sure we were at school, all the stuff that great mums do, which you completely and utterly have got absolutely no idea when you're growing up. The amount of stuff that they do for you is incredible. And yeah, I sat next to her almost shaking, and until she said, take Barry up and go and show him your trophies. And that was, it was terrifying. So yeah, took him up, and the only thought going through my head was get back down as fast as I can. And that's what the plan was to do. Went to leave the room, and he just stood in the doorway and said to me, don't worry, I won't tell your mum what you did to me. And that, again, just that simple line just affected me for years. You know, you're confused. What I'd done to him? What had I done to him? You know, I'd been told to do these things, and I didn't have any choice. And yeah, it affects you. It affects you for years afterwards. And you know, that's why I tell my story. It's really important that people understand not only what happened sexually, what happens to your own body sexually, how you cope with that, but also the emotional impact and the way. And like I say, you know, I'm talking over 2 evenings here. So the impact of ongoing abuse is immense, and the impact of, and the, you know, what can happen and how that can affect somebody. Having spoken to many survivors now, is incredible. It's, you know, it's an important part of this. It's why I tell what I do. Cutting a very long story short, that then, you know, went on feeling that way for many years. He was arrested in America. No idea he'd been arrested in America, but he was arrested in America for raping a boy and served some time in America. And I think that was something like 1994, 95, somewhere around there. And then while that was ongoing, there was an investigation taking place by the British police. Again, I had no idea about this. And then there was a documentary about him, and I think it was released in '97. And that was the first time that I was aware that there were others. And it mentioned 6 on that interview, about 6 people being, but one of the interviews actually said there was lots of boys. And that, to me, it always sort of struck her, well, there was lots of boys, and yet we were talking about 6. So it didn't seem to marry up. And I now know that during that investigation, after, you know, ongoing things, shall we say, that are still going on with my issues and case now, and that there was 23 came forward in 1997. He was convicted. He was convicted of 9 years, and he served 6. And those charges were for charges as serious as rape. He served 6 years and was released from prison, I think, in 2004. But because of me being out of the way, so to speak, in Lytham St Anne's, and these investigations really being highlighted around Cheshire way, I wasn't aware of this until the sort of documentary. And my mum confronted me and said, you know, I saw that. What, you know, did anything happen to you when you stayed? And I just said, no, Mum, nothing happened. I was under a lot of pressure at that stage. You know, I had a young child with me. My son was with me. There was only one, and I was in a quite an early marriage. And I just said, no, Mum, nothing happened. And she said, thank God. You know, I don't know how I would have coped, if I could have coped, if it had. And I was never going to tell a living soul after that moment until she passed. And I was ready. You know, that's what really bothered me, is I'd seen the program and I was thinking, you know, I need to go and tell somebody about this. This is bigger than what these people think it is. And I really need to tell my accounts that he was probably abusing lots of boys at Butlins holiday camps, etc. You know, I need to tell people. And then my mum said that, and I thought, how can I do that? And, you know, having now spoken to a lot of people, it's very common for people not to disclose because of not wanting to upset their parents, etc. And yeah, so I didn't. I kept it silent. But I was always going to tell when she passed. I always had this burning desire, if you will, to get it off my chest. Never told a living soul. Jump right forward now to 2013. And my mum was diagnosed in 2012 with terminal cancer. And during that period, I suppose the only word I can use really is preparing. I was preparing myself to go to police. My mum's dying and I'm preparing to go to a police station. And she was going to skin and bone. It was horrendous. I got really, really close to my mum. I went through a messy divorce in 2008, 2009. It was really difficult. And I went back to live at home for a couple of years. And during that 2-year process back with my mum, I think you really appreciate your mums properly. You know, she was quite an elderly lady, really, and she's looking after me, you know, like I'm her baby. And I'll never forget that. You know, that 2 years I had it's like a second bond. It's like a different relationship. And yeah, she passed away, and in the January of 2013, and I wanted to get the funeral out of the way. And I did. And I just said to my fiance at the time, Teresa, I'd met a new lady who I'm now married to, a wonderful lady. And I just said, look, I said, on the, we'd booked a week's annual leave. And I said, on the Monday, I need to go and do something. I can't tell you what it is, but I need to go and do something. It'll probably take most of the day. And that's all I need next week of our annual leave. That's the only period I need. I need that for me. I need to go and do something. And I can't tell you what it is now, but I will tell you what it is after. And I got in my car on a Monday morning and set off to Macclesfield. I knew some police officers and stuff around Lytham, St Anne's and things like that. And I thought, I don't want to walk into a police station in my hometown and disclose in my hometown. So where do you go? I had no idea where to go, but I've just thought, you know what? I'm going to go to where it happened. And as it turns out, that's a really good thing to have done. And I had no idea about this, but it means that the county where the abuse took place can investigate it more easily, if you will. It's an easier process to do that. Again, completely oblivious, never been in the police station in my life. Never used the criminal justice system in any way. Walked in, disclosed, really difficult experience. Came out, fell apart in Macclesfield multi-story car park. Yeah, it was difficult. And then after that, I realised I had to drive home. I was living in Lytham at the time, and I had to sort of pull myself together. Got home, and then it sort of dawned on me that, you know, I've got to tell Teresa now. So we had a difficult evening, and then you're going through, you know, other aspects. You know, I've got a family, and what do I do, and who am I telling? And so I decided I would only initially tell some very, very close members of my family, all adults. Wouldn't even tell my own children. And couldn't speak to my dad. I was told I couldn't speak to my dad in any way, because it would be like preparing him, and I wasn't allowed to do that. They told me not to speak to my dad, and that they would be down to interview him as quick as they could. When they interviewed my dad, it was a real sort of light bulb moment in a way, because I don't remember this. But my dad said at interview that the first thing I said to him when I got in the car, I remember my memory of coming out of the house and into the car was to drive, Dad, we need to go. And I remember it was me being quite frantic about leaving, and that's about as far as I can remember. And but my dad remembers it a lot more clearly. He said I was very, very strange, you know, very weird in the fact that I wanted to go. I didn't want him to go and speak to Barry. I wanted to just go. And apparently the first things I said when I pulled off were that he was trying to get into bed with me, Dad. but I wouldn't let him get into bed with me. And my dad, because I'd said that, just thought it was maybe just to sit and watch telly. I don't know what was going through his mind, but he never followed it up. And then in 1997, when it came out, he felt that I may well have been abused, but he didn't want to raise the subject with me. And you know, that went on a few years later, and just a couple of years later, just after Bennell's eventual conviction for myself, which I'll talk about in a second. But you know, my dad on his deathbed at Blackpool Victoria Hospital, and the last time almost he was conscious, he's apologising to me. So when people talk about impact, and people talk about the effects of things like sexual abuse, you know, my dad's dying, and he's apologising for taking me. It still, you know, it really hurts. Well, you know, my dad was brilliant. I think the only thing that still worked properly when the police entered his house in 2013 to interview him was his brain. His knees had gone, his heart wasn't good, he had prostate cancer, he had so many different issues and problems. And it was heartbreaking for me. I never wanted my dad to go through that. But I also knew that he knew that he took me and picked me up, and he knew I stayed there, and he could put some pieces to the jigsaw that would be needed. So I disclosed, and it hurt. It was really difficult to do that, but I did it. And yeah, and then you go through that, everything I've gone through now, you go through that entire process. You go to the police, and I'll be honest, the police were great with me that first interview. They were really, really good. I had a female officer. She was very polite, very kind, very courteous, showed a lot of empathy. And I felt really listened to, valued. And then I felt that way, to be honest, all the way through the sort of 5 months or so of the investigation prior to going to CPS. And then I got a letter from the CPS, and it just said, and we decided that we're not going to prosecute, as it wouldn't be seen as in the public interest to do so. Well, any layperson who doesn't really understand the justice system will not know much about that, which I didn't. The public interest is just something that, you know, the CPS uses as a smokescreen, as far as I'm concerned, in cases like this. Because what the letter also said is they believed that I was a credible witness, and that they believed there was enough evidence to convict. They actually put that in the letter. So the reason they gave as it not being in the public interest was that there'd been other prosecutions in 1997 for people around the same period as me. And if I'd have come forward at that stage, it might not have added any weight to the sentence in 1997. Now, if you can make head or tail of that, good luck. Because to me, this is about an individual, and it's about an individual's justice. And that person deserves their justice. They deserve to be listened to and believed, and not to be rolled into one. And I've got, you know, really annoys me when you see somebody that has abused 8 people, 10 people, 15 people, and it's sort of collectively rolled together and given a sentence of 4 years. And if they were going to get 4 years for one person or 3 years for one person, to me, if there's 8, then that's 8 lots of 3, that's 24. You know, let's move this forward, and also let's give them an extra 5 years for multiple offending. Not roll it down, condense it, because our justice system can't cope. These are very dangerous individuals and have ruined lives of a lot of people. And yes, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know whether it comes from my football background or just, but when something's not right, I have a real difficulty letting it go. And I'm not somebody who campaigns. I don't sit there and complain about every meal, looking for a free meal or anything like this. I'm not one of those people that moans about everything. You know, I'm fully aware of life. You know, I was dragged up in a way. You know, we had very little money. We had enough. My dad worked hard, but it was difficult. You know, I'm not spoiled in any way. I'm not. But this was wrong. What had happened was wrong. The CPS are telling me, they believed me, but they weren't going to take him forward. And I'm saying to them, and I've got this, you know, everything that I'm saying today, I've got in writing in some way, shape or form. I can prove, and, you know, that's why I talk about it, because I know I can prove it. And I told the CPS there will be hundreds of boys. I said he was, and the words I used were infatuated with me. He couldn't actually physically stop touching me. He couldn't leave me alone. And the minute there was just me and him, it was just non-stop. And when you think that this is an individual that coached for 20 years in our country, there was nothing special about me, except I could play football. And he ran teams for years and years and years. So I decided to go to the National Review Panel, which had just been formed. And the National Review Panel decided to look at my case again. And through going through that panel and through the fight and the campaign that I went through, if you will, they instigated a change in the guidance in this country, the prosecution guidance, to look at it as more favourably, to look at prosecutions where people may only get short sentences for multiple offences, as seen as more in the public interest to go forward in the future. So it wouldn't just affect my case, it would hopefully help other people in the future and change, you know, when they go for prosecutions in similar cases. And eventually I was told in the March of 2014 that he would be charged, and he was charged with four counts, and he was eventually, I was stood outside Chester Crown Court ready to go in April 2015, and waiting for, I was going in under special measures, which means I was going to do my evidence, give my evidence behind the screen, and I never wanted to see him. I'd always said I never wanted to see him. It's the one thing, I've got the picture of him in my scrapbook, or did have it in my scrapbook, and I know exactly what he looked like as a kid, as when I was a kid, and when he was a young man. I didn't want a new memory of him. I didn't want to know what he looked like. So I wanted to go in behind screens and give my evidence. And I was really cheesed off. You know, I'm trying to be professional here. I'm on a podcast, but I was really cheesed off when the police officer rang me outside Chester Crown Court and said, you know, it's fantastic news. He's just pled guilty. And in my head, I was like, no, that's not fantastic news. 2.25 years, he's pled not guilty. And for 2.25 years, he's put me through hell. I want to go into that courtroom and I'm going to tell everybody what he did. You know, I ain't got any problem with it. So let me in, you know, and let's do this. And I know that's not the case for everybody. I'm fully aware that lots and lots of people would have been delighted with that news. But for me personally, and this is all about me personally, you know, I wanted to have my day in court. And I was absolutely heartbroken that I couldn't go in. And also, you know, let's not pull any punches here. The reason he pled guilty was he'll get a little pat on the back. He'll get a little pat on the back, and he'll get a little shorter sentence. He'll be deemed as you know, what a nice bloke that is for doing that. And that's the only reason he did it. He didn't do it for me. So basically, I thought, you know what, I'm definitely now going to read my impact statement. I was unsure whether to read it myself or whether to just let the judge read it or whatever. But I thought, no, I'm going to read it. So the following month, it was his sentencing, and I thought, yeah, I'm definitely going to read it, but I'm going to read it under special measures. I'm going to do the same as I was going to do in court. Everybody was aware of that. The courts were aware, CPS were aware, police were aware, and everything was fine when I arrived at Chester Crown Court. I was whisked upstairs. I went in through a side entrance, whisked straight upstairs to a private room. Everything was fine, very professionally done. And then an elderly gentleman came to get me, led me down some stairs and some passageways, opened a door and asked me to sit by this big brown door, and literally left me outside court and sat with my abuser. Just me and him. He was yards away from me, all alone. I can see it now. I can see his face now. I'll see his face forever. And the door opened to my left, just literally 2 yards to my left. The bloke came out of the courtroom and thought I was him. Called me his name, which at the time was Richard Jones. I said, that's not me. He called me again. I said, that's not me. He then got up and they had a conversation. And I tell people this, and I'm sure people think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. They had a conversation. Literally, I was sat down over the top of my head. He was close enough to touch at this stage. And he was taken into court. I fell apart. The guy came out of court literally a minute later and said, you know, you need to come in now. And I was like, just look at the state of me. How can I go into court? You know, I was crying. And he said, you know, you need to come in. And I was like, I can't come in. And then my professional head said, well, if I don't go in, they're going to carry on without me. And I thought, that's not going to happen. So I got up, pulled myself together, took a few deep breaths, went to walk in. And just as I'm walking through the door, I said, well, the screens are up though, aren't they? And I was literally then, I wouldn't say manhandled, but pretty much told to stop, you know, like sit back down. Door was shut in my face. There was a commotion in the courtroom. He was led back out of another exit. The screens weren't up. And these things, you know, I obviously bitterly complained to Chester Crown Court after. He was given a 2-year sentence, by the way, which means he would serve 12 months in prison. Now, that to me didn't sound a lot. But at the same time, when you think this was a case that got dropped, this was a case that I was told that he might never get a prison sentence, even if it was taken to prison. So taken to court. So to get the 12 months, I class it as a 12-month sentence, even though it was 2 years, 12 months in prison, was huge for me. And the one thing that I hoped was that there would be media in there, because police wouldn't let me go to the media, even though I told them that, you know, let me go to the media and let the story get out there. There will be hundreds. I told CPS they wouldn't let me do anything. They dropped the case. And there was one writer from the Macclesfield Express who picked it up as a local story in the courtroom that day. And they wrote a story. First thing I asked police as we walked out of the courtroom, the police officer grabbed me and she was trying to hug me and say congratulations. And I was going on about, I'd just seen him outside court and I was really upset. And then the next thing is I said, please tell me there was a journalist in that courtroom. And she said, I think there was one journalist writing away. And I said, thank God, finally this will get out. And the journalist wrote an article that was picked up at Chester Chronicle, I think it is, put it in their paper. A couple of papers in Manchester copied the story. Milton Keynes, which is where he was living at the time, there was an article, and it was all coming up online, different articles. And I know that then sparked other people starting the process of going to police. And in particular, the lead, if you will, survivor, or the first survivor to come forward was for the 18 case, the 2018 case, came directly from that. So that then was put aside. He was convicted. I had to try and get on with my life. I was anonymous at that stage. Nobody knew except a few family members. He'd been convicted. I was trying to work through that process, that 2-year process, trying to go to work every day like nothing was happening. It's incredibly difficult to do that. the justice system is so slow, and when you've got something as huge hanging over you, and you're fighting a campaign to get justice after a case has been done, and you're trying to work, you're trying to function, you're trying to get through life, is so difficult to do. But he was convicted, and life goes on. So me and my wife, as it is now, but she wasn't then, Teresa, we decided we'd go off on our holidays to Tunisia, and we're on a beach 100 yards up the beach from the terrorist attack. We were fortunate that day. It could have been our hotel. You know, I've never seen the aftermath of what happened afterwards is incredible. The helicopters, the ambulances, it's just day 9 of our holiday, and you've got a catastrophe on your hands. You know, we'd gone away to try and recover. And then I'm thinking all the time, I wonder if anybody's gone forward to police. I wonder if anybody's gone forward to police. All the time. I knew he was in prison until May the following year. So in the April, I contacted police. I said, please tell me that somebody's come forward, that, when is he coming out of prison? And the police officer said, there's people come forward, and if he comes out of prison, it won't be for long. So I thought, thank God for that, he's eventually going to be convicted for a lot longer. There's going to be more. I didn't hear anything for ages and ages and ages. And then in the November of 2016, I was actually in a conference. I was on a 2-day conference in Manchester. And I was networking, shall we say, in the evening. I think that's what they call it. And I was sort of having a drink in a pub with a few blokes that I was with. None of which had any idea of this. And my phone's ringing, and it's Teresa. And I'd only spoken to her about 2 hours before. And she knew I was going networking. And I thought, I'll be honest, I nearly red buttoned it, because I just ignored the call, because I thought, it's 9 o'clock at night. And she came, I thought, I better take this. It's got to be important. So I went outside to take the call, and she's like going frantic, really. And there's a guy, and there's something to do with the telly, and it's in the paper, and he's saying that he's abused by Bennell, and I was like, well, you can't do that, because you're not allowed to go to. I wasn't allowed to go to the media, so you can't do that. I couldn't understand it, and I couldn't just walk out the pub. So put the phone down, went back inside the pub. About 2 hours later, and if I'm honest, I'm probably a bit half cut. I've had a few beers, and I've gone home to my hotel room, gone back to my hotel room. Bearing in mind, I've got the conference again the next day. And I'm seeing all this stuff come up. And obviously then it turned out that it was the story of Andy Woodward. And the reason he could tell his story is because he wasn't one of the new people. He was one of the 1997 people. And as such, it wasn't a new case. So he was able to tell his story of being one of the 23 that went to police. But because Bennell was on license, he'd been released from prison, but he was still on parole or on license for his offences to me. And because there was already more survivors, there was cases already at the CPS, waiting for prosecution charges, the journalists involved at that stage knew that this was no longer a 17-year-old story, 18-year-old story from 1997, because that would not be a story. Why would something from 1997 be a story? It was a current story, but it was a way of telling a very old story to highlight a massively current issue that was ongoing now, that was about to lay new charges, that this guy was actually, and obviously with it being Manchester City, it was very much Premier League champions. It was very much a football story. So a very horrendous story in 1997, which, let's be honest, it's a brutally horrendous story, became a very current new story because this was ongoing. And there was new charges coming forward. This was very current. So the media ran the story. and the rest, as they say, is history. I always knew it would be. I just knew. I knew that it would be massive. I knew that it would be hundreds of people. And what amazed me really about it was, in my own head, I was just thinking of football and him. But then, as you go through the process and you start realizing there are other football coaches, there are other clubs, there are other, and then the scale of, Manchester Survivors and NAPAC have both said that their numbers of male disclosures went through the roof in November, December 2016 because of all the media attention. It went through the roof. And the disclosures that they were having, which was then nothing to do with football anymore. And since then, all the other sports that, abuse is, this is not a football thing. This is every type of sport that we're talking about. You've just seen recently about the gymnastics and, there's been swimming, canoeing, it just goes on and on. The list is endless. So it's become very, very big and hopefully helped a lot of people. So I've rambled on a bit there, and I'm sorry about that, but I get really into, there's so much more to tell. But
yeah, I wanted you to be able to, express it without me interrupting you, because obviously there's a flow to the story, and there were so many things that I've sort of wanted to ask you and come into my mind all the way through that. Obviously, when we think about a prolific paedophile, the first person that comes into our minds is Jimmy Savile. And the thing that gets me about Jimmy Savile's behavior was, when you look back at the footage now, knowing what you know, oh my God, he was so cocky with it. He knew he was empowered. He knew he could literally get away with it. Would you say that, looking back now with Bennell's behavior, is there anything similar? Did you get a sense that he felt untouchable, that he could just get away with this and that he was in control?
I think, yeah, not from myself so much, to be brutally honest. It's from the other survivors, from talking to other survivors of Bennell. He was at times going from a bed to a bed to a bed. There was two boys being abused in the same bed. So, he had that arrogance that he could do what he wanted, that he could, literally do what he wanted. And that people wouldn't tell. And there's stories out there now about some of the lads were sort of, if you will, threatened that, if he were to tell anyone, or if they were to go, he would stop their careers. He would drop them from the team. And, it's horrendous, the power and control we had. But he was a very cocky, confident person as well. Yeah, without a doubt.
And interesting, you spoke about when he came to your house and you didn't expect it. And obviously you went into a survival response there. You said you froze, and most people know of fight and flight, which is either I'm ready to fight for my life as such, or I'm ready to run. And then there's that third survival response, which is freeze, which is when you don't feel you have those other options. Obviously it's a very unconscious reaction. Then your body takes the only final option it has, which is to freeze in the moment. And for a paedophile, it's almost perfect, because then your mum says, well, go up to the room, and you can't say anything at that point. Otherwise, you've literally got to start telling your story at that moment. But then he gets you in that moment of such vulnerability, when it's just you and him, to actually put that into your mind that I won't tell your mum what you did. It's a classic paedophile behavior, isn't it? To make it look like it was you in the wrong, and it's your secret, and he'll protect you. So he's reversed the whole role there, hasn't he? It's so I can't think of quite the right word, but it's crafty. It's not the right word, but that's sort of what it is, isn't it? The word should be much stronger than that, really. But yeah, it's
manipulative. I don't
completely, yeah.
Obviously, I don't understand any of that. All I knew from my side of things is it just made me believe that I wouldn't be believed, and that it would be my fault, and that I'd done these things, and just, you know, when you look at that in hindsight, I mean, people talk about it now, why didn't you come forward? You know, God knows how many times I've heard survivors say that they get that. Why didn't you tell somebody? Why didn't you? You just lost. You're just embarrassed. I was confused. I didn't know what had happened. Part of me almost enjoyed what happened. You know, it's so weird. This is a guy who was a hero. And you know, I honestly don't think anybody can underestimate with a child if they're into playing the trumpet, or they're into playing the piano, or they're into badminton, or they're whatever it is that their infatuation is, that their career plan is, that their biggest, whether it's you've got a horse or whatever, for that individual who helps you along that way, you know, he was on the biggest pedestal that I could ever imagine. He's got complete control over you, and you are absolutely besotted by them. And for him to be, you know, he had complete reign over me. I loved everything about what he was, and what, you know, I wanted to be him. When I left Preston, well, even before, when I was still at Preston, I was teaching children how to play football, and I was him. I do this exercise now where I can keep the ball up just on my shoulder, and he taught me how to do that, and I still do that to this day. You know, so if people talk about triggers, you know, I see Manchester City come up on just the words Manchester City come up, that can be a little trigger. People talk about Macclesfield. Macclesfield to me is a massive thing that I just go straight back to Macclesfield. Because the impacts, and it's just so important that people understand. And mine was abuse over 2 nights. You know, let's not forget that people are abused for years. And yeah, it's really important. And just to go back to the case just a little bit, I found out I was really annoyed. And then when he was convicted in 2018, I was still angry with what had happened to me, even though I got his conviction, and then the next case sparked on the back of my case, and all these people have come forward. I was very angry still at the case being dropped by CPS, etc. And a journalist actually said to me outside Liverpool Crown Court, while I was stood outside waiting for all the lads from the 2018 trial to come out and do their interview on the steps, after he was sentenced to 31 years. And while I was waiting, a journalist tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Did you know that there was others that came forward in 2000 in the first case that were never used? They were never used in that first case, and as such, they could have been used with your case." And I was like, "No, you've got that wrong." And he was like, "No, I'm telling you." So I came home that day, and what should have been a really happy moment, again, he's been convicted of 31 years. And I sent an email that night to Cheshire Police to ask for my case to be looked at, and I wanted explanations as to why there was other names. And I eventually got somebody came to my house who led that investigation, the actual chief senior investigating officer who led the 2018 case, came to my house, and she actually told me, she didn't hide it. She told me straight off that there was a list that Barry Bennell had given police in 1997. So in 98, after his conviction, so he was in prison, he'd been convicted, he asked to see police. And when police turned up at his cell, if you will, they actually interviewed him in prison at Bennell's request. Bennell said to them, "If I give you some more names, I don't, to get them off my chest, basically. I don't want to face conviction. I want reassurances that I won't be convicted." And police gave him those assurances. And he then named 9 other people. And police had that list of 9 other people. When I went to them in 2013, and I told them that would be more, they decided not to act on that information. And what infuriates me is my case was dropped. It ruined my life for 12 months, that. I mean, there's no other words around it. other than it ruined my life. I couldn't function. And they knew there was a list. And in 2016, when all the media attention came out about Bennell, when it all blew up in the news, I mean, it was massive. It was front page sort of news, and it was on every single thing for a couple of weeks, you know, about different stories, they were terrified. The police were terrified that the media would find out that they knew about, that boys were being interviewed, that the media were going to find out about this list. So what they decided to do was then to contact the people on that list. And some of them took the opportunity to disclose. And so you've then got a situation where people have now disclosed that could have helped my case, and yet my case was dropped. And there's so much, you know, I was supposed to have been told by parole services his release date. I wasn't told his release date. Parole never got in touch with me, never spoken to me. You know, I was led to him in court, like I've said already, and left with him. The CPS dropped the case as not seen in the public interest. The things on the CPS's website at the time of cases that are always seen to be in the prosecution's public interest are if the child is 12 years or under at the time. I was actually 12, so I was in that category. If the person is in a position of trust, if the person groomed the person, if it's premeditated, if it's planned, if he's got previous similar offences, that's what one of the actual criteria is. If they've got similar serious convictions for similar offences, well, he did. So all the tick boxes, if you will, to prosecute him were there, and they still dropped the case. So even to this day, you know, people ask, am I bitter? Yeah, I really am bitter. I am upset about police, CPS, parole. I think all of them. And what this is not about, it's about trying to improve things. You know, I'm not here to sort of get people sacked or to, you know, that's not me at all. Anyone who knows me would know that's not how I operate. What I want to do is people to hold their hands up, people to say that was crap. You know, we've got to be better than that. We've got to improve. We've got to make sure these things don't happen. So yeah, so I got this platform all of a sudden given to me. Sky News found me, and I was anonymous, remember. Sky News contacted me and asked if I wanted to tell my story in November 2016. And I'd always wanted to tell my story. I'd always wanted to tell people how difficult it was to get this guy convicted, and Sky gave me that opportunity to do so. I had 2 days notice before the interview, 3 days before it was going to go live on Sky News, and my own children didn't know. Nobody really knew. None of my friends at work knew. None of my work, nobody knew. Only about 6 people in the world, 8 people in the world, I think, knew. So I had a lot of difficult conversations to have in a 48-hour period. And to be honest with you, I didn't really have many of those conversations. I just spoke to a few people that I needed to speak to, and the rest just went mad. And I think one of the important, there's 2 more little things I really want to get across, is that after I disclosed, I turned my social media accounts off just for a couple of days. And I almost went out with a balaclava on after I'd been on Sky. I was pleased I'd done it, but I was also thinking, Christ almighty, everybody's going to know, you know. So it was a really difficult one, but it was important to get the story out there. And I turned my phone on, and as I'm going through all these, I can't even believe it. I knew that many people. There was hundreds of messages, and lots of them were very similar messages. You know, really sorry that happened. Congratulations for being so brave, and thank you for telling your story. And there was lots like that, and I appreciated every one of them. But then after about 20 messages or so, there was a message that said I was sexually abused as well as a child. And I'd worked at an organisation for 35 years, which involved youth clubs and lots and lots of children coming through the ranks playing football and for years. And and ended up bringing their own kids to football. And so, generational thing. And I worked there for 35 years. So I got to know an awful lot of people in the local community. And all these people and by the time I'd finished the messages, I had 13 people disclose to me that they'd been sexually abused as a child. At that time, I didn't know any of them had been sexually abused. I didn't think I knew another person in the world that had been sexually abused. And that, I thought, if there's that many people and all of a sudden I had this platform, how can I go away? How can I stop talking about this? So I didn't, and I've carried on ever since. One other story that I tell when people talk about the impact, not the impact, the scale of childhood sexual abuse. I got asked to do a speech at Bristol, well, it's Avon and Somerset Police Station in Bristol. And what I was going to do is travel down on the train, get a taxi to the station, and then back to the station and home. So the only person really, other than if I spoke to somebody on the train, that I was maybe going to have contact with was a taxi driver from the train station to the police station and then back. So maybe 2 different taxi drivers. And because I was going to the police station, and then because I'm leaving their headquarters to go back to a train station, the 2 taxi drivers were quite inquisitive as to why I'd been at a police station or why I was going to a police station. So I told them, because I don't hold it back anymore. I told them who I was and what I was doing. Both of them, I met 2 people in Bristol, other than the police officers and people in that conference. I met 2 people, and both of them have got, one was a family member who was abused, and one was a family member who'd been convicted of abuse, sexual abuse. I only spoke to 2 people. So when people talk about the scale of things, that to me summed it up perfectly that day. And that's why I do what I do, because people don't want to talk about this.
That's exactly what we were talking about just before we came online, wasn't it? That this is a subject that people find so horrible and so awkward to talk about, they'd rather not. And it's interesting because I notice Twitter, as an example, is when I share anything related to child sex abuse, I get so little interaction on it, or so few likes or so few retweets. I could put a picture of my cat out and I'll get more sort of interest in it.
Absolutely.
And so obviously it's not a subject we want to make normal from the point of view of it's not normal and it shouldn't be happening, but we have to make it a subject that we can raise the profile on, because what I assume you want to achieve through this, and certainly I would like to, is to ideally, in an ideal world, that it doesn't happen. Okay, we're on a hell of a long journey to get to that point, and I'm sure that won't happen in my lifetime. But to sort of start that process, and you can only start that process by communication, raising awareness, and not burying this subject all the time because it's so horrible. And it does happen in small communities. You know, I live on a tiny island of Guernsey, 66,000 people or so on this island. And I see clients, and some of those have been sexually abused. One person that comes to mind is somebody who was 4 when she was abused. She was an adult when she came to me. And one of the things, she felt so much guilt. This was a 4-year-old. And that was what I said to her. I said, what's a 4-year-old to know or to do? And when she was able to sort of dissociate herself from it, sort of step back and think of a 4-year-old and the innocence and the sort of complete lack of knowledge, she was able to then realize that, of course, it wasn't her fault. Of course, she shouldn't feel guilty. But that's just one example. And so it does happen, sadly, all over the world. And the other thing is talking about things like sports clubs and such likes, and it's schools, isn't it? Often these paedophiles seem to manage to integrate themselves into places where children are accessible to them. And obviously we don't want to sort of fearmonger and in that way, and to sort of say, oh, you know, be on alert, but in a way, be on alert, sort of be aware of maybe any changes in your child's behavior, or if anything just doesn't seem right, maybe just to have that awareness, and make sure your child, you know, for instance, when you got back into your dad's car and said, drive, get away, your dad had that inkling, but he didn't want to ask the question because it was so horrific, I imagine, for him to even go there. And it was easier to say, just to sort of push that to his mind and think, well, if David's got a problem, I'm sure he'll speak up, and leave it at that. So I know I've sort of thrown quite a lot at you there, but it is about, we have to talk about this and not be fearful of talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody wants to talk about it. You know, I've offered I'm talking locally now, you know, to go to local sports clubs, to go to local organizations and give a talk. Free. And, you know, people, the take up is terrible, or was terrible. You know, it's not something that people want to hear and want to discuss in any way. You know, I've got 3 brothers. It's where you go to, and that's why people, you know, go to therapists in the end, you know, and it's quite often because they need that bit of extra support, but you know, a lot of the time it's because they've got nobody to speak to. If they just had a few people that would be prepared to listen, that would be prepared to, you know, to sit there and show some empathy and show some understanding and let them speak, then maybe they could process it. But because you don't have anybody, I mean, you know, I've got a really supportive wife. I mean, she's absolutely fantastic. What she's allowed me and helped me and campaigned with me and over the last 7-8 years is incredible. But she still doesn't want to talk about it. You know, and I get that. I get that. She doesn't want to sit there and listen to detail of the abuse that took place, etc. But if you've got nobody, who do you talk to? You know, how do you overcome some of the feelings that you've got? And it is really difficult. What you said before about the child themselves, there's so many different signs and symptoms. I mean, you know, look on the NSPCC website. I mean, there's a list there. It's immense of possible signs and symptoms. Now, some of them are very, very mutual sort of symptoms. So, for example, you know, bedwetting. Well, just because somebody's bedwetting doesn't mean that they're necessarily being sexually abused. Just because somebody's behavioural is going off the rails a little bit, you know, and maybe they're acting up a bit at home, doesn't mean that they're being sexually abused. So there's so many different signs and symptoms, and obviously a lot of them are different age specific signs and symptoms. But it's just being, like you said before, aware of a change in an individual's character. If there's a sudden change in their behaviour, that could be something to, if somebody doesn't sit right, or they're talking sexually explicit, and they seem mature above their times, they know things that maybe they shouldn't do. There's all sorts of different stuff in there. But the biggest thing that we've got at the moment is ultimately the children as young as 9, 10, even younger in some cases, have got access to the internet. And in a lot of the cases now on their mobile phones. So whereas in days gone by, there'd be one computer in the house, it would be about 3 foot wide, and it would sit on a huge desk in the front room or in the back room, and everybody, you know, now kids are in the bedroom, and they're on the bedroom on the phones. And, you know, I think the program that's highlighting it on this program on telly at the moment that's highlighting the police undercover sting operations, and you know, anybody who watches those programs on Channel 4 will see. I think it's on again tomorrow night. It's been incredible, the work that they're doing. But the scale of online abuse is immense. It's just immense, and it's growing, and it's a real issue, because obviously they gain access to your children very easily. They make fake profiles and start chatting away. And it's, you know, you've got a vulnerable kid who's not getting much attention maybe at home, and all of a sudden there's this wonderful young 13-year-old glamorous lad, or a really good-looking girl. This profile pops up, wants to engage with you, wants to start talking to you, and before you know it, you're off and running. And it's about, you know, I know there's a lot more awareness out there than there was in 1980. You know, let's not kid ourselves. There is a lot more awareness out there, but there's also still a huge amount of naivety. You know, I'm speaking to a lady at the moment whose teenage daughter has been abused online. You know, and sexual pictures exchanged and images and you know, all these things. And it's a horrendous period. And really good stable home, really good interaction with the parents. You know, all these things are in place where you think, well, it's not going to happen to that family. And that's exactly what has happened. So, you know, it's a subject that does, like you say, need to be spoken about, needs to be talked about. People can't hide because of the impacts. That's my concern, is it doesn't go away. It's not like, you know, you break your arm, you put yourself in plaster for 6 weeks, and obviously depends on how you break your arm, possibly, but if it's just a complete accident, then you get over that. Your arm recovers, and it doesn't work like that with emotional and your thoughts and your feelings. It takes a lot longer to process and to understand and to get over some of the things. I mean, some of the things will never happen. You know, my mind tells me that what happened to my body, my own body, during my abuse, to this day says to me that's not a normal reaction. That should not have happened. Something happened that day that shouldn't have done, and I struggle to process that even to this day. And yet I know, after speaking to doctors and psychologists and whatever else, that is a normal body reaction to what happened. And even though I've been told that with people with long letters behind their names and all these, you know, wonderful qualifications, that is still difficult for me to process at 53 years of age. So, you know, to me, it's really important that when I go and give my talk, I go into a bit more detail really about the abuse, because it's important that people understand. And you know, I didn't want to get graphic on here today and put listeners off, but it's horrendous. You know, what I was made to do that day was in my opinion, was horrendous. It'll live with me forever, and that's why I try and do what I do.
I think it's definitely a worthwhile cause, and it is important to keep putting it out there. This must take its toll on you. I mean, obviously, watching you talk about your story, there are moments of still very strong emotion there, which is obviously understandable. And it just makes me think this is still taking such a toll on you, partly because I know that, you know, you're effectively putting yourself back into that situation. But you obviously feel the pull to do this is so strong that you're prepared to do that. But can you find peace, or do you feel you have any peace in any of this?
It's really strange, because you're quite right in what you say. When I talk about it and when I go there, it brings certain memories back. But in the same way, it's sort of cathartic. It helps to not, you know, knowing that it's helping others is a big thing for me. It really helps me, and you know, that's why I sort of do it. It has been a really difficult period. I mean, people talk about my own case was only, but I really did feel that the ongoing cases were very much my cases. I almost had ownership. I felt they were my cases, and so the whole thing's gone on for years. It has had an impact. It's had an impact in many different ways. This ongoing, and sort of this year, if I'm honest, will be the last year I do what I'm doing, because of my new journey and my new sort of, you know, hopefully by July 22, I'll be a therapist in my own right. It's been a 4-year journey, or it will have been a 4-year journey. I wanted to make sure that I was ready for the journey before I started. How can I sit in a room and feel that, you know, I could talk to somebody else about this? If I can't listen to somebody else, you know, I've got to be honest and congruent and be able to, you know, do that and be thrown into those situations, and I've put myself through an awful lot over the last few years to be able to listen to survivor stories, and yeah, I feel that I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. There are difficulties. It's always emotional talking about my mum. You know, I read a poem out at the funeral, and in the middle of that poem, right in the middle of it, I added a line. It was my own, I say poem, it was just a made up story, but it sort of flowed a bit like a poem. And there was a line in the middle of it that said, I promised I'd keep it secret, Mum, but it's almost my time. And that just got me for a second then. At the wake, my son, my eldest brother, a few other people came up to me and said, I was listening to your story and your poem, and you said something about, you promised you keep it secret, Mum, but it's almost your time. What were you talking about? And I said, I can't tell you today, but you'll know soon.
There's so much I'd like to talk about. Probably just maybe one final question, if that's okay, which is,
yeah,
for people who have been abused, my concern for those is that fear of not being believed. For some would be quite great. And is there any way or words of encouragement that you could maybe offer those people?
I think there's different ways, isn't there? So there's the people that really want criminal justice, and you have to be realistic about that. And I don't hide from that. It is very difficult to get a conviction for a non-recent case of sexual abuse. If you're talking about somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s coming forward saying that they were sexually abused as a child 15, 20, 30 years ago, it is really difficult to get a conviction. And people need to be aware of that. Now, am I saying don't go to police? Absolutely not. I'm saying being realistic. And I'm saying I would only start going through the process of the criminal justice system if you've got support at home. If you've got somebody who you can talk to, whether it's, even if it's a best friend, I'm not saying you need to live in the same house as them, but you need somebody. It's such a slow process. It's such a difficult process. And it's going to raise a lot of emotions. It's going to give you a lot of flashbacks, a lot of difficult periods, and you will need somebody to speak to during that 12 months, 2 years of an investigation, and be realistic about the prospects of that prosecution. If you're talking about just somebody wanting to get rid of that burden, to get rid of that, if you will, guilt, that feeling of not being believed, then I would always recommend that somebody speaks out. I felt so much better after I spoke out. I felt so much better. I think I was at a stage in my life where I was very comfortable with not really worrying too much about what people thought about me. Maybe in my 20s and 30s, I was a bit more, maybe it wasn't so like that. But as I approached in sort of my late 40s and 50s, and I really don't care. And, I wanted to tell people, I wanted to do what I did. But yes, hopefully you will have somebody in your lives that is a good listener, that would support you, that would help you. What would I say to someone on the other end of the spectrum who has somebody that opens up to them? Is absolutely listen to them, absolutely believe them. Don't throw in your opinion. It's not about your opinion. It's about them. And listen to them, show them some empathy, give them some time, ask them if there's anything that in any way you can help, be supportive. But I think more importantly is trying to do that for an ongoing basis for a while. Don't just listen to them once and then cast them aside, because this process isn't going to go away after one meeting. If they offload to you, they're going to want to offload again. They're going to want to sort of see you. And I'm not saying become a counsellor and start sort of making a weekly appointment with them, but just make sure that they feel that they can come to you again, and they can speak to you, because they will need to speak to you.
And I think probably some sort of therapy of some sort, just particularly when they're going through the process or when they're in that just opening up phase, is probably a good thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm training to be a therapist, and I shouldn't put myself out of business, as they say, but to me, everybody's different, and you know, you need that safe environment, that place to speak, and someone who understands, who's going to really, you know, trained professional can really help. And yeah, if you've not got that, certainly you've not got that anywhere else, you're definitely going to need some therapy.
Thank you, David. You've spoken with such, as I say, courage and integrity, and let's hope that this message does continue to get out there, and that people will feel that they can do whatever they need to do, who have been in that situation of abuse or are in that situation of being abused. Let's hope that people feel that they can have the courage to do what's right for them, and have that strength. So thank you very much again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Much appreciated. Thank you. Thanks for your time.